the Ions group. And he was in the audience with about 23 people, and we had a really good time, and a lot of people, probably almost everybody bent through spoons, and he did a really nice test. He brought a spoon which he had photographed beforehand. It was a fork. And then after he bent it, he photographed it again and put it on his website. So that was kind of interesting. So I looked at his website and I was very impressed. So I emailed him, I believe, and asked if he wanted to speak for us. He's an artist. He does little miniatures that are mind-blowing. For gaming, he's into a lot of things. So the only thing I can tell you is he's also co-wrote a comic book, and he's a very interesting person.
She's a polymath.
And I have a little gift for you.
Oh.
I want you to close your eyes.
Okay.
And close your eyes.
Okay.
Say the magic word.
Abrahadabra.
There's something for you.
That is sweet. Okay. Thank you, sir. And thank you for my magic wand. Okay. And thank you to the Theosophical Society of Maryland for inviting me to give this talk. I give you a little background about myself, I suppose, before we begin. So I moved to Baltimore in 1997 to attend the Maryland Institute College of Art. So my degree is actually in illustration. And I became involved in the comic book industry. That's actually still kind of my day job, although I'm more on the digital distribution side. Although I did, in the process, write this book, Serial Artist. And the reason that I cite it, it's a graphic novel, and it's important to me in that when I began work on this book, I was essentially an atheist. Really wishy-washy agnostic. I kind of didn't know or care one way or the other. And by the time I was done with it, I believed I was a magician. So there was a lot that went into that book that we're not going to talk about today, but I will tell you there is a great and terrible danger in playing around with using magic in your stories, because chances are they make what you wrote happen. And in one way or another, this is instrumental in the synchronicity that led me to studying ceremonial magic in the first place, and why I'm here right now with you guys. So before I really start getting into this, the first thing I want to say is, and I always actually cite your own Madame Blavatsky when she said, there is no room for authority in occultism. And I feel that way very much. Nothing I am saying I expect anybody to accept or believe at face value. Your heart will tell you what is true. And this stuff can become an earwig in your mind, and it can bring you truth, even if it doesn't sound like it right now. So with that in mind, it's also, I feel, while I feel like I understand this stuff, I don't claim to be any kind of an expert, and I'm standing here because I am standing on the shoulders of giants like we all are. We all have a great number of mentors that we can cite who were instrumental in our education, and like to actually, for those who are interested in pursuing this a little further, I would recommend the YouTube channel Mind and Magic, that's Magic with a K, by Frater Xavier, who I owe quite a bit of my own study to some of his insights and in the very synchronistic way that his lessons seem to find me when I needed them. So I just sort of feel like I'm paying it forward as best I can. So how to begin? This class, for lack of a better term, called Magic 101, Magic with a K. Now, what is the difference and why do we spell it with a K? The Aleister Crowley, who I will cite many times, the notorious, infamous occultist who wrote some of the best books on ceremonial magic that we have, had said, or had used magic and spelled it with a K as a way to differentiate between stage magician, card tricks and pulling the rabbit out of your hat, and illusions, being an illusionist, and being a ceremonial magician. That is, Crowley defined magic as causing change to occur in accordance with will. And we'll get into will a little bit more as we go on. I know a lot of people, their first knee-jerk reaction to that ever infamous phrase, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Everybody's hackles go up, right? Because they think that's a complete invitation to debauchery and to do whatever without willy-nilly whatever it is. And the truth of the matter is, if you apply that in a spiritual sense, it is the exact opposite of that sort of doing whatever you want. It's more finding the true will, which, again, we'll get into a little bit more, but the idea is that it is the unity of the self, of all self, the unity of all desire into a single thrust of energy, in a sense, as you go out into the universe with the universes at your back. All right, so I feel like I ramble a little bit. I'll probably get a little tangential as we go through. That's why I put notes to keep us on track. So I'm going to start because obviously I expect skepticism. I actually invite it. Like I said, I started my journey from a very atheistic, scientific point of view, and I'm very skeptical. It was only, everybody has their moment where it's like, oh wait, this was not what I thought it was. This might be something different. But to kind of bring you along on that little journey, I'm going to try to bring you from a skeptic's mindset into where you can walk around with the Kabbalistic tree of life in your head and apply it to your life as you go. That's a very bold statement, I know, but we're going to try. Okay, so we'll start with a riddle. How to say. Okay, how is it that something as ephemeral as consciousness could arise, evolve, so to speak, from something as mundane as inanimate matter? Where did consciousness come from? How did we evolve to get there? Now, obviously, there's always the debate, is consciousness real and to what degree? But we know that we exist. We are aware of that sense of being the observer, right? And in many ways, I think you guys might even be familiar with the idea of, like, people use the metaphor that, like, my human body is my spacesuit, and I am piloting it in this three-dimensional world, interacting with a bunch of other people in their spacesuits, but where I am is somewhere else. My true self, my inner core, is non-local. Now, how do we prove this scientifically, right? Or can we even do such a thing? Now, what is proof really, but I would cite that you look at the people who are doing great works in the fields of quantum physics. For instance, I will always cite Dr. Amit Goswami, who some of you may know, the quantum activist, What the Bleep Do We Know, and he wrote a great book called The Self-Aware Universe, in which he talks about the idea of, like, he was sitting down and doing the equations and trying to figure out, like, all right, we can quantify consciousness and we can quantify matter. We can't figure out how this came from that. How did this come from that? The equations didn't line up. And he had a moment of inspiration and he just switched them around. And suddenly all the math made sense to him. That matter was the final extension of consciousness. The final one. And that is part of what we'll be describing today as we go through this. All right, so if we can kind of take from that step, we can also look at the fields of neuroscience, where we can map every part of the brain, except we can't find where the observer is. We know where everything else is, but we can't find where that lights up. It sort of implies that, in a way, perhaps we could argue that if consciousness was already there, the chemical makeup that started evolution to amino acids become a protein, or so on until you have more complex life that was evolving like an antenna to pick up consciousness signals until essentially now we're getting really, really beyond ourselves to the point where, like, well, how do you get to something as complicated as the human being? But if we can take that idea, regardless of how we got there, the idea of the idea of the consciousness being non-local, and we are essentially receivers of this non-local information, right? That's essentially us. Okay, so talked about Goswami. All right, so All right, so let's take a more transcendental, more esoteric view of the same concept, right? Let's look at Hinduism and the idea of the god Vishnu. This is one of my favorites, right? Vishnu dreams, and in his dream, he dreams dreamers who also dream. And in the sense that shows the idea that consciousness is the basis, and that we are, in a sense, we might get a little more into the holographic universe as we get a little more, but the idea that we're in this sort of shared astral space as well, to which 3 dimensions, just what we perceive in that visual light band, which is very, very small compared to, as you guys know. Okay, so we talked about consciousness being non-local, talked about, okay, so getting to how we're going to go through this, and I hope you guys will take a little bit of notes, but I'm going to fill this out with you as we go. I feel that is a great way to learn. As we go, we'll fill out the map. So some of you may be familiar with this diagram before. It's that Kabbalistic tree of life. And it is, for many people, many ceremonial magicians in particular, serves as sort of a hyper-sigil map of the universe and how energies interplay with one another and how they manifest in our reality. And as I said, it sort of kind of maps everything, and we'll get there. Okay. So, like I said, but also as we go down, we'll also use as a basis for our advancement the 7 Hermetic Principles. And actually, there's 8, but we'll get to 8. The 7 Hermetic Principles, which are also sort of foundations of magical thought, as well as being sort of foundations of the way that the universe functions. And so we'll go through this as we do it. So what I'd like to say is, if there's something you need like immediate clarification on that you're really confused before we go on, please ask me. But otherwise, I'd like to hold and do a Q&A just at the end. So if there's a question that can wait, chances are I might answer it anyway, or we might just be able to get to it at the end. So before I go on, was there anything that you guys need a clarification on before we start?
I just want to clarify, in Hebrew, the word tree of life is Eitz Chaim.
Okay.
There's an actual center in
I'm going to ask for your forgiveness in advance. I don't have a Hebrew background. I have toyed with the Hebrew language a little bit because it is important. And while I might touch on a couple of things and mispronounce some stuff very
I'll
carefully,
help you with that.
I'm just, keep in mind, regardless of how you sort of try to articulate yourself, you're always a fractured view of perfection anyway. So regardless, even if I did it perfectly, I wouldn't be doing it perfectly. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's get started. All right. So before we can really talk about what we're going to do is we're going to go down the tree of life as we go to each of the SEPHIROTH, which is what these circles are referred to as. But before we can get to the creator, the all, we have to talk about zero. We have to talk about nothing first. Because since we live down here in this three-dimensional world where we're stuck on the arrow of time, and past is behind us and future is in front of us, and we're only ever in the present, where, when we start thinking in a more fourth-dimensional way, we know that time and space are the same thing, and they're also sort of non-local, and that consciousness is really the thing that's on the arrow of time. But if we're going to extrapolate from that, if the universe exists, in theory there was a time when it didn't, or something to that effect. So we have to sort of wrap our heads around the idea of nothing. So now fortunately, Qabbalah does this for us in the sense of there are considered the veils of negative existence. So if we're to imagine, before we even have anything, we have Ein. We have Ein Sof. We have Ein Sof. Okay, which mean absolutely nothing. Like not even the concept of nothing, like nothing. Ein Sof, which is boundless, or limitless, or nothing with the potential to become something. So And then we have Ein Sof Or, which is boundless light, the limitless light, the source of all creation, the source of all energy. When we say source, we mean the limitless light that pours down out of the.
Oh,
Come on.
Hello, everybody. Sorry.
That, sort of in a Big Bang kind of way, the quantum fluctuation happens, and then boom, we have a catalyst of evolution, or something to that effect. I can't claim to be able to articulate the higher concepts of God. All we can do is try, right? So we have these concepts of negative existence before we get to the first one, which we call Keter, which means crown. Okay? This is the Godhead. This is the source. This is the one. This is the all. This is the aggregate of everything, to which everything extends, and to which it all returns at some point. Now, this also corresponds to what we would consider to be our crown chakra, right? The halo chakra, the one that connects you to the divine above in the column of light. We'll get to that in a little bit. So the Samhasrara chakra. I'm sorry, just the crown chakra. I'm going to screw those up if I try to say them. So how do we try to articulate this concept of the all? Well, fortunately, we have a pretty handy one that we'll use in occult circles. It's like a Noricon, which is basically you take the first letter of every word in the sentence and you smash together that word. And it's in Hebrew, so I'm not even going to try. But essentially, how we write it is Ra-Ri-Ta. And what does that mean? What does Ara-Rita mean? Ara-Rita means, or translates to mean, or summarizes to mean, one is God's beginning. The principle of God's individuality is one. God's permutation is one. The idea that this is where people, you might actually, in some of the more esoteric circles, you might have heard like the law of one, concepts like that so that's really what we're trying to wrap our heads around, right? That ultimately all experience is a singularity, and it's God's experience. And then we're all fractions of that, having subjective experiences. Okay. I hope I didn't lose anybody there. But, okay, so we talk about the creation of the universe, right? What's beyond God? Like, okay, all power, all consciousness, all whatever. Why is there anything at all? We don't know the answer to that question. Some people might argue that maybe making the universe wasn't the best idea, but I argue that I'm having a good time. I hope you guys are too, and hopefully that when we're done, we feel like this was a worthwhile experiment. Creation, so to speak. But it's not. So regardless, we're going back to more the occult, sort of the Hermetic concept of what is called the lightning bolt of creation, and we use the tree of life to sort of articulate this. The idea is that God's power, or the light, the power of light, the libido, the creative force, the catalyst for creation, right, extends down the tree of life like a lightning bolt until it reaches the 10th Sephiroth, which we'll get to, but we call Malkuth, which is where we're at. We're down here in the 3D, mucky, like high stakes, life and death, fight and flight, survival, the universe trying to kill you 100% of the time, 3D reality that we find ourselves in, even though we are each of the Sephiroth as they are created, as the light descends, becomes an aggregate of the one before it. So within 2, you have 1. Within 3, you have 2, and so on. And don't worry, we'll get there. But that's also where you can find you've no doubt heard the concept of the name of God, the Tetragrammaton,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yehovah or Yod-He Vav-He. We can also, not that we're going to do this today, but there's a very cool way that you can put the letters of the Hebrew alphabet on here, and they have very telling correspondences. But we can do Yod, He, Vav, He in this respect, as it sends, and that, I'm sorry, Yod, He, Vav, He, or Yehovah is the 4-lettered word of God, right? That Tetragrammaton. With me now? Okay, cool. So, now we talk about the light descending. Now, while these Sephiroth are sort of, there's a lot to each one of them. They're each a number, they're each a color, they're each a planet, and we'll go over these correspondences as we go. But then there are the paths between them, which are sort of, energetic states, as well as being concepts. And while they also have correspondences to the tarot deck, the high arcana of the tarot deck, and we will touch on that briefly as we go through this, that would be a class in and of itself. So we're not going to spend a lot of time with the tarot as we go, other than to point out the correspondences as we go. So as the light descends, the path we put here is the Fool card. For those of you who are familiar with the tarot deck, the idea is the Fool is the impetuous, without a care, without any caution, pouring forth, without a care, just raw journey, right? A raw journey. The Fool begins the journey. He begins the journey of the Zodiac. We would put the Fool here. The Fool correspondence. His number is 0, and his element is air. Air being, we'll get into the elements as we get farther down. But air basically is the sort of the intellect, the element of intellect, the idea that it's all in the mind, right? That's what we're trying to say here. It's all in the mind. So it starts with mind and moves towards matter. But we're not at matter yet. We're not even beyond, and we'll get there, but we're not even beyond the abyss yet. Okay. So, but, sorry. I forgot to highlight the Hermetic Principle first. So the first Hermetic Principle that will be, and these are in no necessarily particular order. I ordered them this way because I figured they'd help me with the talk. But mentalism. The idea is that everything that you do, that you experience, begins in the mind. Everything that happens is filtered through the mind, through your perceptions, through your senses, through your experience, and the meaning that you place on that experience. It's all here, right? So the idea that we take from this, or that we extrapolate from this, is the idea, or you might have to stretch a little bit with me here, but the idea that thoughts have form. Some of you have heard that idea, a thought form, or an agrigore, I think it's sometimes called. The idea that you can, with a combination of visualization and emotional energy, you can, something takes on a life of its own that's not in a 3D sense of the word. Now, that could be good or bad. That's really up to the magician. But if we are to imagine that thoughts have form, we also have to talk about what thoughts. All right, how do we say what thoughts are? Okay, so I had trouble with this, and I'll explain it to you guys the way that I figured it out, because I think you might appreciate it. Now, lots of people, certainly not just the Egyptians, but many people, have talked about the six senses, right? We know our five: sight, sound, smell. But the sixth sense, what is the sixth sense? Now, the Egyptians came up with a very cool way to depict this that I'm sure everybody is familiar with, the Eye of Ra or the Eye of Horus, but I'm going to show you something that I thought was very cool. Okay, so of the five senses first, we have, of course, sight, smell, taste, which is interesting because, of course, they relate, touch, hearing, and then the final, the sixth sense. What is the sixth sense? Right? Well, they claim it's thought. And for a while, I had trouble with that. What do you mean it's thought? It's thought. I mean, we stand sight and sound, but how is that? And then we put ourselves in the mindset that we're pilots of this meat suit that's got these DNA energetic antennas that are picking up all this information, and my consciousness is non-local in the first place. Then, in a way, the thoughts that we receive are like a gift. They can be accepted or rejected, but they are, if we treat them like a gift, like something external. Not that we can't take ownership of the thoughts that we have, or we shouldn't be proud of great ideas that we have, but the idea that if it is this gift, right? Something happens and I feel angry. Well, that's on me. I decided to feel angry. I decided to have that reaction. Many people will find that they will instead be following the programming, and we'll get to programming a little bit as we get into conscious unconscious mind. Sorry. So the idea of the thought being non-local, that to be accepted or rejected makes us responsible for our behavior, makes us responsible for our emotions. And if there is nothing else that you guys learned from me today, this is the most important lesson, and it's the reason why I'm touching on it first. Because lots of magicians find their way to learning this, and some of them don't learn it early enough, because it should be lesson number one. This stuff is lesson number one, and this, that we have to take ownership of our thoughts. We have to take responsibility for our actions, and that more to the idea that you can, a thought enters your mind, you accept it, you reject it. And so you find that you need to only accept the thoughts that are in your best interest. Now, obviously, that sounds really, really easy, and it's not. It's not. We will constantly work at it for the rest of our lives. But if we can approach it from that standpoint, then we have really started to unlock the key to finding and doing our true will.